When you think about Indian history, it's just massive. It's this incredible, sprawling story that goes back tens of thousands of years. Honestly, trying to get your head around all of it can feel pretty overwhelming. But what if I told you there's a hidden pattern, a cycle that repeats itself over and over, that actually helps make sense of it all?
So, that's the big question, right? How do you even begin to tackle that? How on earth do you boil down a narrative that stretches from the Stone Age all the way to the Space Age into a single, understandable story?
Well, here's the key. Indian history isn't just one thing after another. It's a constant push and pull. On one side, you have a strong central government trying to unite this vast subcontinent. And on the other, you have all these diverse, powerful regions pulling away, trying to do their own thing. This tension, this tug of war, is really the engine that drives its history.
So let's dive right in and start with this cycle first played out on an epic scale, the ancient world.
Okay, so after the incredible urban planning of the Indus Valley and the foundational Vedic period, two giant empires stepped onto the stage, and each one had a completely different idea about how to solve the problem of ruling India.
Both the Mauryans and the Guptas face the exact same challenge, but wow, their solutions were worlds apart. They ended up setting two competing blueprints for governance that would echo for centuries to come.
The Mauryan playbook? It was all about total control, a massive top-down bureaucracy where the state managed pretty much everything. The Guptas, on the other hand, went a totally different route. Their model was flexible, decentralized. They relied on local feudal lords, called samantas, to do the governing, giving them a lot of autonomy in exchange for loyalty and, of course, tribute. So you had one that was rigid and powerful, and another that was adaptive and pragmatic. All right, let's fast forward to the medieval period. We see new empires wrestling with this very same problem, but now they had the benefit of hindsight. They could see what worked and what really didn't.
The Delhi Sultanate used something called the Ikta system, where they granted land to nobles. The big problem? These nobles would get super powerful in their own regions, and then boom, they'd break away. The Mughals saw this and were like, nope, not happening to us. Their solution was absolutely brilliant, the Mansabdari system. Here, an official's rank and land were tied directly to the emperor, and here's the kicker, their posts were transferable. This clever trick made it almost impossible for any one noble to build a permanent power base, keeping all the loyalty pointed right back at the center.
But hey, while all this political chess was happening at the top, something really powerful was bubbling up from the ground level. The Bhakti and Sufi movements were transforming society from the bottom up. These were spiritual movements that just cut right across political lines, preaching social equality and a personal connection to God. They created this amazing cultural blend that really came to define the era.
And then, everything changed. A new force arrived that didn't just want to play the game, it wanted to flip the whole board over. The colonial era wasn't about continuing the cycle of governing India, it was about totally re-engineering it for one single purpose.
And that purpose was profit. The entire administrative machine of the British Raj was basically a giant engine designed for one thing: to pull wealth and resources out of India and ship them back to Britain.
So how'd they do it? Well, they had a few different systems. One created a new class of powerful landlords. Another taxed the individual farmers directly. A third taxed entire villages as a single unit. But it doesn't matter which system we're talking about, because the impact on the Indian farmer was always the same: crushing debt, losing their land, and just widespread poverty.
And if you want to see the real-world impact of all this, just look at these numbers. It is staggering. In 1700, around the peak of the Mughal era, India was an economic powerhouse, producing almost a quarter of everything in the world. By 1950, after British rule, that share had crashed to just over 4%. That, right there, is the drain of wealth in stark numbers.
So, after independence in 1947, a newly free India is left to pick up the pieces of this shattered economy, and it begins its own incredibly difficult balancing act, dealing with the legacies of its entire complex history all at once.
The Green Revolution is a perfect example of this tightrope walk. On one hand, it was a massive success. It made India self-sufficient in food, basically ending the constant threat of famine. But on the other hand, the high-tech seeds and fertilizers were expensive, so wealthier farmers got richer, while many smaller farmers were pushed even deeper into debt. It was a national victory that came with a very high social cost.
And you see that same pattern again with the huge economic pivot in 1991. India basically tore up its old state-controlled playbook, the licensed Raj, and embraced the free market.
And just like that, GDP growth went through the roof. But that incredible boom also came with a familiar consequence, a major spike in social inequality. This led to a really tricky problem that economists call jobless growth. So what does that mean? It basically means the country's overall bank account is getting bigger and bigger, but it's not actually creating enough new jobs for its huge population. It's a very modern challenge, but its roots are deep in these past economic choices.
So where does all this leave us? What's the big takeaway here? Well, it's that modern India isn't just one story. It's a mashup of all these different historical layers, stacked one on top of the other, often pushing in completely different directions.
Think about it. The Mauryan drive for unity, the Gupta model of giving regions some freedom, the Mughals' administrative genius, the deep economic scars of colonialism, and that modern-day struggle for growth that's also fair, they're all still here. They're all part of the mix, shaping the India we see today. And that really leaves us with one final big question. As India keeps rising as a global power, which of these powerful forces from its past will win out? Will it be the impulse to centralize, the reality of its diversity, the relentless drive for growth, or the growing demand for justice and equality? That is the question that will define its path forward.